In the East Midlands, how do we create jobs and opportunities in a post-Brexit world? The region's businesses have a plan.
This week, our top business leaders have been down at Westminster giving the politicians a Christmas wish list of things they need for the region. But will the government response be one of Scrooge or Santa? And
abuse and threats in the political world. Is it time to take tougher action?
Since Jo Cox was murdered, as a counsellor who does surgeries and has a young daughter, she gets upset now when she knows that I've got a surgery that week. She genuinely worries that something like that will happen to me.
Hello, I'm Mary Ashby and my guest this week, Anna Soubry, is the Conservative MP for Broxtowe and Margaret Beckett is Labour's MP for Derby South. First, the East Midlands problem that seemingly won't go away, low education standards. The Chief Inspector of Schools, Sir Michael Wilshaw, has said standards in secondary schools in Nottingham, Derby and Leicester are pitifully low. And he's not the first person to ever have said this, Anna. Why aren't we making better progress in the East Midlands?
Well, I have to say that there's an academy in my constituency which has been declared as a world-class school. That's George Spencer Academy. So I just wanted to put a bit of sunshine into an otherwise very dull and depressing report.
There are some outstanding schools in the East Midlands.
There aren't enough of them.
No, there aren't enough of them, and we do have the worst GCSE results in the country.
Look, I think it's a combination of things. I think that we have generation on generation of low aspiration and expectation, and I say that as a Nottinghamshire, East Midlands girl through and through. If you look at the success in London, a lot of that has been, it's not all about resources, but it's been about making a real effort to get great head teachers in. And I think, I look at my George Spencer and I know they've got an outstanding principal, head teacher and so on.
And more money's going into London schools, perhaps?
No, it's not as simple as money, actually. I think it's aspiration. I think we need to get cracking teachers. I know there's an argument...
Are you saying that the teachers that we have in East Midlands aren't up to scratch?
No, I think we need to have exceptionally good teachers, and you need them as heads. So I look at my schools in my constituency, and I've got some good heads and I've got some outstanding heads. But we do need, I think, as a East Midlands society, to have that conversation that talks about aspiration.
Margaret Beckett, what's your view on this? Why are we falling so far behind?
I think Anna's made a very strong point, actually, because I have found over the years, I'm sorry to say, that yes, often people don't aspire, haven't got the ambition to be so much better, which in fact they could be if they had the help and support, but also if they had the desire.
Is the problem at home then?
Sometimes, yes, yes. I'm afraid so. Parents who perhaps weren't particularly successful themselves don't necessarily want or think there's any need for anything better for their children. One of the things I think is really depressing is, we have, certainly in my patch, we've got excellent manufacturing. We've got really high quality, high value jobs. But lots of those companies tell me that they can't get enough people with the skills. And that's a tragedy, because there's an opportunity there that we aren't taking.
I think we can do things like get business much more involved in schools. I think that can be really helpful, and it helps youngsters, it gives them aspiration, and then some of those core subjects like STEM subjects, science and maths and so on, they can be encouraged and aspire to do better than perhaps their parents did.
Yes. Next, the economy. And East Midlands businesses have been outlining what they want to see from the government to help them cope with Brexit and make the most of the opportunities it presents. But how important is trade with the European Union to our region? Well, we've been speaking to the UKTI in the East Midlands. That's the government department which promotes exports. And the figures show that exports to the European Union from the East Midlands were worth £8.7 billion in 2015. And that compares with £10.6 billion to the rest of the world. The EU was still the single biggest customer for our region's exporters, with 45% of East Midlands exports going to the European Union, compared with 22% for Asia and Oceania, which includes China, and 17% to North America. Well, this week, business leaders from the East Midlands were in Parliament to deliver a list of demands to help them grow the region's economy and to tell government how they want to see Brexit handled. Our political editor, Tony Rowe, was there.
They crammed into a Commons dining room, a place where they often serve cake. Business leaders want to have a fair slice for the East Midlands. They want business interests to be high on the menu at the Brexit negotiating table. And this is a chance to tell our MPs we export to the EU more than any other part of the world.
It's really about uncertainty, and clearly uncertainty is the enemy of investment, which in turn obviously leads to creation of new wealth and new jobs. So clearly what business are looking for is they want that clear roadmap.
This event today is about, as the East Midlands Chamber's leaflet says, shaping a great future for the East Midlands. And my role as a Member of Parliament in South Leicestershire, my role is to ensure that South Leicestershire and the whole of the East Midlands is well looked after.
Here, with the cream of East Midlands business, the Chamber represents 4,000 companies and say as a region we have a manufacturing heart. Planes, trains, cars, scientific research, pharmaceuticals.
Any business person knows you can't show your hand before you go into a negotiation. I guess the best we can do is make sure that the MPs and the politicians are listening, put our case forward and make sure that that comes through when the negotiations start.
The value of exports have fallen over the last 3 years, so the Chamber has come up with a Christmas card to the government. But they're being greedy. Inside is not one, but 2 Christmas lists. On the economy generally, they want bold and certain investment on rail and road projects. They want to see red tape cut, support for small business looking to export for the first time, and more routes and flights to regional airports like East Midlands. Their Brexit Christmas list includes funding for an expanded programme of trade missions and trade fairs, guaranteeing to replace EU money on projects currently funded by the European Union, continued access to the European Investment Bank, and transitional arrangements to cushion the effect of leaving any free trade agreements. A big part of achieving economic growth is, of course, having a skilled workforce. There are 2 things on their list. On the general list, it means having education to give people at home the skills they need to get good jobs. And on the other Brexit list, it means having the ability to recruit skilled workers from the EU when they're needed.
Well, we're joined now by Roger Helmer from UKIP. Welcome. However you look at this, Roger, trade with the European Union is pretty important to the East Midlands economy. Will it become harder and more expensive if we leave the single union market?
No, it absolutely won't. I was in a meeting just 2 days ago with Michel Barnier, who is the European Union's official negotiator for Brexit, and he said if you insist on controlling your borders, then you can't stay in the single market, you can't stay in the currency union, you will have to have a free trade agreement. And coming from Barnier, I thought that was very important. What we need is to be an independent nation, but with a free trade agreement with the European Union. Trade with Europe will continue, but trade with the rest of the world will get easier because we've got countries lining up to do other free trade deals with a newly independent United Kingdom. Anna
Soubry, you're a strong advocate of the single market. Do you think that we should be members and even pay the price for that?
Yeah, I mean, there are certain rules, and obviously we have to be realistic about this. We're not going to get a better deal when we leave the EU, and I've accepted we are going to leave the EU. We won't get a better deal, but the idea that if we have a separate agreement, and we know the one with Canada took some 7 years to negotiate, the idea that it's not going to cost us more is, I'm afraid, disingenuous. It will. I'm a great believer in the single market and also the customs union. And if we don't have, Margaret will know more about this because she represents Rolls-Royce and other companies which rely on this movement of parts, movement through these supply chains, free not just of tariffs, but also some of the glue and the sticky bits that go with customs duties. And so the idea that there is some great nirvana out there which will make things better, I'm afraid is misleading.
Let's forget Anna's point that she's making about 7 years. The fact that we've been in the European Union for so long means that we are on many measures really quite converged. The other thing is, of course, that you've got Mercedes, Audi, BMW. They want to keep selling their cars.
So we've had a benefit then from being in the EU then, haven't we, for all that time?
Well, there aren't any benefits that we couldn't have as an independent nation with a free trade agreement. My point is, you've got all those German car manufacturers, French agriculture. All over Europe, there are people who are keen to keep exporting to Britain. We will be their biggest external. We will be their biggest external. We will be their biggest external customer when we leave.
But it's 8% of EU imports. Their exports come to us.
You don't buy your dinner with percentages. You buy your dinner with money.
Yeah, if you could
and we will be their biggest single external customer.
I was just going to say that we have to be very honest with people about this. We don't hold the cards. It's the EU that holds the cards. It is going to be. We aren't going to get a better deal. And I do.
Let me ask Margaret what she thinks about this. Margaret, what do you think about this? What's your view?
I think it's absolutely bizarre what Roger has just been saying. And like him, I have some acquaintance with Michel Barnier, and he may have said, you'll need a free trade agreement. That's not by any means saying, and that'll be easy, we'll just give you a free trade agreement. Michel Barnier will want blood. He always has, and he always will. And the negotiator for the European Parliament, Verhofstadt, is even worse. So the notion that this is all going to be easy, simple. Well, unfortunately, Roger, I shouldn't need to remind you, the European Parliament does have a vote on the deal, which is why it's so stupid.
We don't hold all the cards, do we?
I'm sorry to hear these charming ladies talking down Britain and saying we're in a weak position. We are in a very strong position.
I think what they were trying to say is that it's not going to be easy to get the deal that we want, rather than talking down.
Let me tell you why it will be easy. Let me tell you why it will be easy. Sorry, all right, not charming ladies. No. Let me tell you why it will be easy to get a deal, because the worst case is that we become an independent nation under WTO rules. If we do that, the amount of duty payable on British exports to the European Union will be very substantially less than our net budget contributions. Okay. We are better off either way.
Oh, I'm glad that means you don't want a hard Brexit, because that's what a hard Brexit means. You'd go straight into WTO.
No, well, it means what you want it to mean. What we want to be is independent. We don't want to pay into the budget. We don't want to obey the rules.
Want your cake and
we
eat
want
it.
we want to be an independent country and have what hundreds of other or 100 other independent countries around the world have.
Margaret
we want to be like that.
Roger, I don't know how many international negotiations you've been part of,
Quite
but
a
I have conducted about 14, both as lead negotiator for this country and sometimes as lead negotiator for the European Union. The world is not the way you are trying to paint it, and you are deceiving people. And what really makes me angry and makes me very worried, I mean, that delegation are important people. I have huge respect for them and for the companies they work for and the case they're trying to put. But the thing that is going to kill us if we're not careful is that people like you are telling people it's all easy, simple, we'll just take our money, we'll walk away, we'll be absolutely fine. And anybody who asks any questions or says, what about this problem? Or Rolls-Royce says, we've got a big difficulty here to overcome. Or they're just trying to overturn the will of the people. It's dishonest and it's absolutely treacherous to the interests of this region and this country.
I wonder if you'd like to apologise for using the word deceiving. You can disagree with my opinion if you wish, but I'm not seeking to deceive anyone.
I think you may not be seeking to deceive them.
That's the effect.
But what you are saying is so unlikely ever to be achievable that you are doing enormous harm. And I don't think you care.
That is your judgment, and it is a mistaken judgment. I have been sitting in...
to British business. Do forgiveness.
I do listen. What did they ask for? They asked for less red tape. How do you get less red tape? You get out of the European Union.
That's also, when it comes to doing trade, one of the benefits of the single market is that you all operate under one set of rules. It absolutely works. And it works for British business, and that's why they want us to stay in the single market. And if we come out of it, the damage that we run the risk of causing real damage to our economy.
There are all sorts of guarantees that they were asking for, weren't they?
Why do you want to stay locked into an inward-looking, self-referential customs union with a common external?
We're actually not having that conversation.
It is facing existential problems.
We accept that we are leaving the European Union because that was the decision of the people.
But you're trying to water down.
No, we're not. That is what is so dangerous about what people like you are saying. What is so dangerous is that you are trying to pretend that every question, every difficulty, every point that has to be raised and overcome, and is being raised every day by the people who employ thousands of people in this region, that's all about saying no to the referendum decision. Nobody's saying no to it, Margaret, but it's not as simple as you claim.
I spent 30-odd years in international businesses. I do understand what is implied. I was involved in trading between Britain and other countries.
Okay.
Oh, it was years ago, because I've had 17 years' experience of being in Brussels, and I know a bit about what happens there
But if
too.
you talk to British business, what they want is that what the single market gives to them, which is this ability to trade without borders, without barriers.
Okay,
What
I think
they
we'll
want
have to leave it there.
what
Roger
they want
Helmer.
is access, they will get access.
Roger Helmer, thank you very much indeed for joining us in the studio. And as we've seen, politics can arouse strong passions, but when does it go too far? There are growing concerns that the levels of abuse directed against people in politics is putting others off becoming involved. Helen McCulloch has been talking to some of the victims of online abuse, and just a warning that you may find some of the language they use to recount their stories upsetting.
Tory scum is the standard.
We should just die or get cancer.
I had someone very, openly call me a monkey.
Politics has never been for the faint-hearted, and those who put their head above the parapet expose themselves to fiery criticism. It's been a polarising year. Heated debates over Brexit, the economy, even the US election has put politics at the forefront of the national conversation. Abusive messages sent on social media are becoming commonplace, but hatred for our elected representatives reached its height in June with the murder of Joe Cox. And it's changed how our politicians work.
We've had protesters outside the MP's office and people in masks shouting abuse at marketers and frankly shouting abuse at little old ladies coming in for help at surgery appointments, which isn't on. We don't go out as much to things like home visits and things like that as we used to. We've had to have new security cameras and things installed.
I mean, my daughter, she doesn't like me going out doing anything political now. It really worries her. People do want to talk more about politics, and that's great. But whereas before you'd have a letter that would just say, I'm really not happy with this action, please change your mind on it. Nowadays, people are getting online abuse, they're getting shouted at in the street, they're getting death threats and things like that, and I find that really worrying.
And it's not just our politicians. It seems anyone with a campaign is fair game, as one Nottingham woman found out when she backed a police move to make sexual harassment in the street a hate crime.
I kind of feel like I got off quite lightly because I've seen what other people have got, and I feel that that's even worse. People who've had really quite concrete death threats made towards them, rape threats. And I think when people speak up about issues, particularly when women speak out, when people from black and minority ethnic backgrounds speak out, there are other people who will try and silence them and to just shut them up so that they can't be heard.
So what can be done to tackle a growing problem? The police advice? Get in touch with them.
First of all, they must contact the social media website master page and let them know so they take their own action. But also report it to the police. And don't feel that it's too low level and not very important. Do it because the police have got the capabilities and the technologies to target people if they have done wrong.
In an increasingly divided Britain, politicians are striving to keep the art of debate alive. The worry is those brave enough to take part may start to avoid the conversation altogether.
Well, Anna, this is the most recent example of the kind of stuff that you've been getting. You received this tweet this week, someone saying, Joe Cox, Anna Soubry. What was your feeling when you saw that?
Well, that came in on Friday when I was on Twitter about the Richmond by-election, which, of course, we got the result on Thursday night. And I'd had another threat, a death threat, on Wednesday to my constituency office, which we took really quite seriously. And as we're always told to do, we reported it. And I have to say, my local inspector that I've been dealing with has been very good, but it has, and I know Margaret would be very concerned about this, that unfortunately, I'm afraid the Met Police and my local police were not great, but because I've got an excellent chief constable and a good inspector, they're now onto it. But
Anna,
it does upset you.
I've heard you saying before that you are you're thick-skinned. You're a thick-skinned old bird, Anna Soubry. That's who I am, and you say you can handle yourself.
Oh no, I didn't say that one.
But how does this get to you?
Well, I mean, it does. I mean, you sort of do a little bit of looking over your shoulder. I mean, I'm fed up with all this abuse, and it has to be said, the level of abuse has gone up since the referendum. There's no debate about this. You know, in Nottinghamshire, the number of hate crimes, the reported hate crimes, gone up by 18%, and it's still not gone down.
Margaret, I know that you're not on Twitter, but you've been in politics a long time. Is it worse now, this kind of abuse that councillors, politicians like yourself are getting? I mean, you know, or was it bad in the 80s, for example, during the miners' strike? Is it that it's social media? Is it that the emotions are so high now?
I think it's partly social media, or it seems to be. But I'm afraid I trace it back to the Scottish referendum, which is when things started to get really, really nasty. I mean, Scottish colleagues had not only social media and email sort of abuse and intimidation, but actually physical intimidation on the streets. You know, if somebody was starting to try and canvass or something, a crowd would gather round and scream and shout at them.
It's not just online, this kind of abuse, is it? It's on the street. It's very in your face, isn't it?
And you know, yes, all right, exactly.
Shot where he was actually prevented.
There was a man with his face like that, screaming at him.
And Jim Murphy, one of the kindest, most gentle. I mean, obviously talk complete rubbish about politics. I must be messing about. But you see, this is the point, isn't it? Is the language that's used. I mean, we can have good, robust, fallout-type debate and everything else.
But still get on with stuff afterwards.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot that goes on. But
what do you do then, Anna? What do you do about that? On social media, for example,
well,
you can ban people, you can block people, you retweet their stuff. I've seen you.
Sometimes, if I've got the time. I'm not going to spend the whole of my life dealing with horrible,
vile people. What should be done? I mean, if you stop people and you ban them, you're stopping free speech.
No, you're not. No. This goes beyond it.
The social media people themselves have got we need to have a better conversation and a proper discussion and think about how social media works and how it's handled. Because one of the other things that has come through, and again came through originally from my experience in the Scottish referendum, was that all the stuff that's on Facebook. And people, I remember a colleague telling me about somebody who's having a conversation with somebody who seems perfectly sensible, sane person who absolutely knew that the referendum had been won for independence and that it had been changed by MI5 and the government, and people had been deceived. And in the end, he sort of said, look, how do you're absolutely convinced, you feel you know this. How do you know? I'm on Facebook every night for 2 hours. It tells me on
people
Facebook.
Believe
that's why I know it's true.
Here, we'll have to leave it there.
Facebook takes no responsibility.
That's why we'll have to leave that there. Time now for a roundup of some of the other political stories from the East Midlands this week in 60 seconds. Leicestershire police are investigating claims of historical sex abuse in children's homes. Operation Medway is looking into allegations involving homes in the city and county between 1960 and 1990. No one has been arrested. The East Midlands Ambulance Service has seen a 20% rise in the number of life-threatening calls in the last 2 years. A BBC investigation has also found that despite some improvements, delays in handing over patients from ambulances to hospitals are a growing problem. There are fears over the future of 4 leisure centres in some of the region's most deprived areas. Mansfield District Council says the Meaden Sports Centre in Warsop is no longer sustainable, while 3 centres in Ashfield are also under review. Forget the National Lottery, Melton Borough Council is launching its own. Tickets cost £1 and the top prize is £25,000. The council says there's a 1 in 50 chance of winning, and the money raised will go to charities and community groups. And that is the Sunday Politics here in the East Midlands. Thanks to Anna Soubry and Margaret Beckett for being this week's guests. Next week, Edward Argar and Glenys Wilmot will be here. Now back to Andrew Neil.